Dionysus, son of Zeus, addresses the audience, explaining that Thebes is his birthplace and the ancestral home of his mortal mother, Semele. After Semele's affair with Zeus, his wife, the jealous goddess Hera, mocked her for never having seen Zeus in his true divine form. Deceived by Hera, Semele begged Zeus to reveal himself as a god. He appeared as a bolt of lightning, and the mortal Semele, unable to withstand his divinity, was consumed by fire. Zeus rescued the unborn child and sewed him into his thigh. Dionysus was not recognized by the house of Cadmus, and Semele's family accused her of having a mortal lover and lying about Zeus, punishing her with death. Dionysus now returns from the east to avenge their disrespect of his mother and their refusal to allow him to be worshipped or receive his proper sacrifices. He appears in Thebes disguised as a male Lydian leader of female followers, demonstrating to the royal family, even against its will, that he is a god who deserves acknowledgement. By his arrival, he has already driven the women of the palace to madness and led them to the hills of Mount Cithaeron, where they sing, dance, and perform Bacchic rites as Maenads. Semele's father, the aged Cadmus, has passed his kingdom to his grandson Pentheus. Pentheus violently refuses to honor Dionysus, despite the miraculous and frenzied displays surrounding him. The prologue concludes as Dionysus commands his followers to sound the drum. The chorus enters from both sides of the stage, praising Dionysus. Their ode unfolds in 3 parts: a prelude calling for sacred silence, a hymn in 4 sections celebrating the blessed state of a Maenad, recounting Dionysus's birth, urging Thebes to honor the Bacchae, and tracing the drum's role in their worship, and an epode or refrain describing the ecstasy of the Bacchantes. In Greek theatre, the first song or direct address typically establishes the play's background, clarifies potential confusion, and sets the story in motion. A prologue predicts the general outcome and structure while concealing key twists. The prologue of the Bacchae recounts material familiar to its audience: the birth, cult, and history of Dionysus. Euripides, however, is known for refining classical traditions, and he demonstrates this in his innovative use of the prologue and his reworking of the Dionysian myth. Rather than merely sketching a moral or showing the god's supremacy over humans, Euripides uses the prologue to present Dionysus as a direct human agent. Here, Dionysus appears not only as a mysterious, transcendent god, but also in mortal form, interacting within the drama. This choice is not just theatrical. It comments on the nature of Dionysus and what he represents. Euripides emphasizes the significance of disguise, recognition, epiphanies, masks, and transformation in Dionysian myths and cults. Born of a mortal mother, Dionysus exists both among the Olympians and in the human world, and Euripides highlights this duality by placing him inside and outside the play. His presence among mortals is fitting because his worship evokes intimate and communal emotions. Through the prologue, Euripides introduces the key aspect of Dionysus: ambiguity. The god embodies contrasts, belief and madness, celebration and destruction, and his actions reflect this fluidity. Finally, the prologue grants the audience privileged knowledge. They alone know the true identity of the stranger from Lydia, creating dramatic irony and amplifying the sense of inevitable tragedy in the play. In Euripides's time, the extensive use of the chorus had become somewhat outdated, yet he revitalized it by merging it with elements of the play itself. Traditionally, the chorus was a unified body of singers and dancers, separate from the central action. Euripides associated these traits with the Bacchae, a wandering cult that honored Dionysus through song and dance. In this way, the chorus became the Bacchae, and the Bacchae became the chorus. Euripides allowed the chorus to perform its classical function, but he also gave it a richer narrative purpose. It comments on the events of the play, offers a moral voice, and links scenes over time. In the Bacchae, the chorus goes further. It describes Dionysian rites from within, expresses shared reactions, and most importantly, amplifies the drama, frenzy, and passion through its music and dance. The chorus celebrates the joyful, communal, and life-affirming side of Dionysus. They are devoted followers who willingly followed the stranger from the east to Thebes. While their songs sometimes carry a bloodthirsty tone, their deeds remain benign. The chorus, however, is not the only group of women devoted to Dionysus. On Mount Cithaeron, the mad Maenads represent the god's darker side. Driven to frenzy against their will, these women embody a violent rupture of social order. Unlike the chorus, they are never fully shown on stage nor given a voice, with the exception of the tragic and solitary Agaue. From their position on the mountain, the Maenads manifest the wilder, destructive, and uncontrollable aspect of Dionysus. The tension between these two opposing, yet complementary, groups of women mirrors the central conflict of the play. Pentheus, as the defender of order, versus Dionysus, as the embodiment of ecstatic disorder. Tiresias, the old and wise seer of Thebes, arrives at the palace and calls for Cadmus to join him. The two old friends have decided to don fawn-skins and worship Dionysus on Mount Cithaeron. As they begin their journey up the mountain, dancing along the way, they feel a surprising youthful joy in their limbs. Pentheus appears, unaware of the old men, consumed by his own anger over the runaway women. He regards the Bacchic rites as a thin disguise for licentious, depraved, and drunken behavior. As king, he has already commanded the arrest and imprisonment of all the Maenads, but his efforts to restore order are complicated by the recent arrival of a foreign Dionysian figure, with long hair, flushed cheeks, and a large following of women. As Pentheus rages about what he will do to the enchanter's hair once he captures him, he sees his grandfather and Tiresias dressed in Bacchic attire. He launches into a scolding tirade, mocking their foolishness. Tiresias responds, arguing that if Demeter, a respected god, governs solid nourishment, or food, then Dionysus governs liquid nourishment, or wine. He explains that Dionysus's gift brings joy, relieves pain, and induces sleep. Tiresias continues, clarifying that the story of Zeus sewing Dionysus into his thigh is based on misinterpretations and confused etymology. The blind seer concludes by asserting that Dionysus is a powerful god, master of frenzy, inspiration, panic, and prophecy, and thus deserves respect for his ecstatic power. Pentheus responds with spite, threatening to destroy Tiresias's religious objects and sacrificial stores. The two old men hurry away, fearful that Pentheus will bring calamity upon the family through his relentless rejection of Dionysus, yet knowing that he inevitably will. The chorus then sings the first interlude, or stasimon, in 4 parts. They first call upon Holiness, a minor deity, to witness Pentheus' sacrilegious defiance against Dionysus, and then praise a quiet life that avoids folly and recklessness. In the second part, the chorus speaks tenderly of escaping to Cyprus, the Isle of Aphrodite, where they can perform their rites in beauty and peace. This mood returns in the final section, as they honor Dionysus for the peace, gaiety, and moderation he brings to life. Euripides is concerned not only with the nature of Dionysus, but also with the nature of religious belief itself, offering arguments both for and against worshipping the god. In the first scene, the two old men express the wrong reasons for embracing the new religion, self-preservation and fear. Pentheus, while rejecting Dionysian worship, exhibits the most extreme and violent form of the same tendency, self-preservation, upholding the family name, and rigid rationality. The first half of the scene is somewhat burlesque, poking fun at an overly intellectual Athenian type of the time. Pentheus' entrance establishes his character and his stance toward the new religion. From the outset, his self-absorption, short temper, and preoccupation with sex are evident. His understanding of Dionysian worship is shallow, limited to crude fantasies and schoolboy notions. Dionysian cults allowed women to express violent emotions openly, in contrast to 5th century Athens, which, like Pentheus, required women to be modest, self-controlled, and rational. This ideal of female virtue implied submission to male authority. With the arrival of the Dionysian cult, Thebes faces a choice about what women may and should do. though Pentheus' reaction to the old men reflects his tyrannical, hot-headed, and aggressive nature. As a ruler and guardian of the state, he is partially justified in seeking not only to curtail but to crush what he sees as a decadent and immoral cult. A crucial part of Tiresias's speech is his declaration that Pentheus is mad. This is one of many inversions of sanity and madness in the play. The nature of madness itself is a major theme. Tiresias suggests that extreme rigidity, even in the service of reason, is a dangerous form of madness. To cling to one's beliefs to the point of waging war against the gods is the greatest folly. The chorus mirrors the play's tone and mood at every stage, like a heartbeat. The first ode is measured and balanced, celebrating the joys of a restrained life and gentle pleasures, yet it contains veiled references to the violent and ecstatic aspects of Dionysian worship. A servant leads the disguised Dionysus into the palace courtyard and presents him to a delighted Pentheus. The servant recounts the remarkably easy arrest of a stranger, who did not resist in the slightest, but offered his hands willingly to the guard. Not only did the stranger remain composed before authority, but he even smiled at the servant. The servant, impressed by his behavior, felt ashamed and explained to the stranger that he was only acting under his master's orders. The servant also reports that the other prisoners, the Theban women driven mad by Dionysus, had mysteriously escaped to the mountains to continue their singing and dancing. Witnesses claimed that the chains fell off by themselves and the doors unbarred themselves. This final miracle, together with the stranger's impeccable conduct, deeply impressed the servant, who attempted to hint to Pentheus that his actions might be misguided. Yet Pentheus, eager with his new captive, ignores all signs of the stranger's divinity and focuses solely on interrogation and demonstrating his power. Pentheus begins by asking the stranger where he comes from and by whose authority he has introduced these rites to Thebes. The stranger explains that Dionysus himself has sent him. Pentheus responds with scorn, mocking the myth of Dionysus's birth and powers. The stranger, however, remains unshaken, asserting that the god himself instructed him in the various Bacchic rites. Pentheus attempts to ridicule these rites, but Dionysus calmly replies, "It is not lawful for you to hear, though it is worth knowing." The stranger continues, explaining that because Pentheus has been impious, he is not permitted to know the true nature of the rites or the god. Enraged at being denied this knowledge, Pentheus persists in rhetorical tricks, all of which fail. The only lesson he gains is the exposure of his own anger and futility. As in earlier scenes, Pentheus resorts to crude physical measures: arrest, imprisonment, and destruction. He concludes the encounter by threatening to cut Dionysus's hair, destroy his possessions, and lock him away permanently. The stranger calmly declares that his god will free him and, in turn, chain and punish Pentheus. Infuriated, Pentheus demands that Dionysus be bound in the dark palace stables immediately. The second interlude, or stasimon, unfolds in 3 parts and is simple yet direct. The first section reproaches Pentheus and all of Thebes for rejecting Dionysus, recounting the god's birth and his connection to Zeus and fire. The second section contrasts this by describing Pentheus' lowly ancestry, the house of Cadmus, said to descend from a dragon's tooth planted in the earth. Pentheus, a wild-faced monster and murderous man, must face punishment. The chorus calls upon their lord to punish this monster who has imprisoned the god's follower in a dark dungeon. The final section speculates on Dionysus's location. The chorus imagines he may be in Nyssa, a mountain linked to another story of a city resisting the god, or in the wooded recesses of Olympus, home of the Greek gods. They consider Pieria, the birthplace of the Muses, with its pleasant rivers and valleys, symbolizing the relaxation and joy Dionysus brings to his worshippers. Finally, the chorus envisions him crossing the 2 rivers, Axios and Lydius, as he makes his way toward Thebes from Olympus. The central axis of the play is the relationship between Pentheus and Dionysus, unfolding over 3 episodes. In each encounter, the role and power dynamic of the 2 characters are completely reversed. Like a seesaw, the fall of one comes at the expense of the other. While the disparity in apparent power seems clear, it is superficial, for Dionysus possesses the ability to shape and orchestrate the entire narrative. As a god, he arranges an elaborate illusion to teach Thebes a lesson and fully expose Pentheus' flaws. This dual position of Dionysus as both actor and author is evident in this scene, as Pentheus interrogates the stranger on the nature of the god. In the first of the three encounters, a delicate and effeminate Dionysus, the stranger, appears as the prisoner of the commanding and interrogative Pentheus. Yet as their conversation unfolds, Pentheus begins to lose his authority, for Dionysus responds with calmness and truth. Pentheus reacts with anger and force, declaring, "You must pay penalty for your foul sophistries." At moments, the god seems to offer Pentheus space to learn or repent, but the king refuses to perceive anything in the new religion beyond his crude, preconceived fantasies. In a key moment of dramatic irony and psychological insight, Pentheus sarcastically remarks that the stranger's god will surely come to rescue him. Dionysus replies, "Even now he is close by and sees what I suffer." Pentheus retorts, "Well, where is he? He is not visible to my eyes." Dionysus responds, "Here with me, but you, because of your impiety, do not behold him." Pentheus is blinded by ignorance and doomed by his refusal to see beyond the obvious. His foolishness is heightened by the audience's awareness of the stranger's true identity and the impertinence of Pentheus' arrogance. In all prior accounts of Dionysus's miracles, presented by Tiresias and the servant, Pentheus had also refused to acknowledge the god's power. The king continually returns to the authority he wields, yet in this scene the limits of his power become clear. He cannot mock the stranger's beliefs or rights, for he does not know them. Even the arrest of the stranger was not truly Pentheus' achievement, for the stranger had willingly walked into the palace to be presented to the king. Unlike the first ode, the chorus in this interlude longs for action and justice, though they are not entirely bloodthirsty, ending with a vision of peaceful mountains, rivers, and valleys. The chorus also mirrors the central confrontation of the scene, alternating between verses devoted to Dionysus and his antithesis, Pentheus. Dionysus's divine birth, from fire and the heavens, contrasts sharply with Pentheus' earthy and bestial origins. Finally, the chorus forms a bridge between scenes, as their cry to Dionysus for justice is answered by his booming divine voice off-stage. A flash of white light fills the stage as the chorus hears the divine voice of Dionysus off-stage, answering their prayers for justice. The god calls upon the spirit of the earthquake to shake the palace, and the chorus watches as the columns of Pentheus' palace collapse. Fire is summoned next, and flames flare up on the tomb of Semele, Dionysus's mortal mother. Stunned, the chorus flings itself to the ground in mounting hysteria. Dionysus then enters in his disguise as the stranger and addresses the chorus, asking the women to rise. They greet him as though he were the god himself, momentarily recognizing Dionysus's twin position as both mortal and divine. Soon, however, they revert to treating him as a mortal and ask how he was freed from the palace stables and Pentheus' grip. The stranger, barely concealing his powers, replies that he freed himself. When the chorus mentions knots and chains, Dionysus explains that he used illusion to trick Pentheus. What the king bound was not him but a bull. At that point, the god shook the palace with an earthquake and set fire to Semele's tomb. The audience now hears of the miracles from inside the palace. As the fire flared, Pentheus believed the entire palace was ablaze and ran about, ordering servants to extinguish the flames. Amid the confusion, he remembered his prisoner and rushed to seize him, only to strike shadows on the wall instead of the stranger. The stranger recounts other humiliations inflicted on Pentheus by Dionysus, including the complete destruction of the palace. As the stranger walked out of the ruins, he saw Pentheus collapse, exhausted, to the ground. As the stranger finishes recounting the story to the chorus, Pentheus' footsteps are heard. The harassed king enters, ready for battle and carnage, still unwilling to acknowledge Dionysus's divinity. Dionysus urges him to remain calm, reminding him that no matter how many reinforcements arrive or how high the walls, the god will triumph. Pentheus insists on action but is interrupted by a messenger, a cowherd who witnessed the Bacchantes on Mount Cithaeron and has come to report to the king. The cowherd first asks if he may speak honestly, without fear of punishment for contradicting Pentheus. Eager to learn more about the forbidden rites, the king reassures him. The cowherd describes seeing 3 bands of women, including Semele's sisters, sleeping peacefully in the open air, showing no signs of drunkenness or misbehavior. At sunrise, they awoke to the sound of nearby cattle, rejoicing, letting down their hair, donning garlands, and playing with forest creatures. Some even suckled wolf cubs. When they pierced rocks, milk, honey, and wine sprang forth. The cowherd tells Pentheus that had he been present, he would have been convinced of Dionysus's divinity. Overconfident, the cowherds attempted to capture Pentheus' mother, Agaue, but the women discovered them. The furious Maenads attacked the men and their herds, killing the cattle. The cowherd concludes by urging the king to honor Dionysus and accept his gifts into Thebes. Yet Pentheus ignores the divine signs, focusing instead on the power and madness of mere women, and resolves to capture and kill them all. At this moment, Dionysus begins to tempt Pentheus' imagination. The stranger promises to show him the Maenads' rites, and the king becomes fascinated. Dionysus persuades him to go in disguise, avoiding the fate of the cattle. Though initially suspicious, Pentheus soon agrees. Dionysus instructs him on each part of the disguise: long hair, long skirts, a thyrsus, and a fawnskin. Thrilled at the opportunity to witness everything he has imagined and suspected, Pentheus accepts the plan. Dionysus argues that this covert action is safer than shedding blood, and Pentheus is completely ensnared. The third interlude, like the third scene, is divided into 3 parts. Unlike the previous interlude, the tone of the chorus is now relieved, triumphant, and exhilarated. They review the events of the last scene and take heart in the success of their leader, Dionysus. Imagining themselves as deer running freely through the forest, escaping the clutches of a hunter, they ask themselves, "What is wisdom?" and answer that wisdom is vengeance. They sense the hand of the god at work and feel that justice is near. Their song celebrates both glorious escape and the sweet joys of divine revenge. Dionysus the god is clearly different from Dionysus in disguise, yet they are one and the same. Their simultaneous existence is reinforced in this scene by the double telling of the same miracles. While the audience and chorus hear the god commanding the earthquake, the stranger is inside the palace tormenting Pentheus. From the start of the play, Dionysus has demonstrated the range and intensity of his powers. While his initial displays were benign and peaceful, he now reveals his fearful aspect. He first uses force to literally shake Pentheus and his palace, then employs illusion to neutralize the king's physical responses. The series of illusions, Pentheus wrestling with a bull, running around the palace in panic, and striking at shadows, introduces comic elements, stripping him of authority and turning him into an object of ridicule. The collapsing palace serves as a visual symbol of Pentheus' diminishing authority and a sign of the impending disintegration of his sanity. Dionysus knows of Pentheus' obsessive fascination with the secret activities of the Maenads, and the stranger exploits this to bait the king. Completely captivated by the idea, Pentheus agrees to dress as a woman, exposing his inability to make sensible decisions. By the end of this scene, the roles of king and prisoner are inverted, as are the male-female and hunter-prey relationships. As in the second scene, Dionysus takes the stage and calls upon Pentheus to enter. Pentheus, eager to see what he should not see and to achieve what should not be sought, appears dressed as a female bacchant. The god now overtly controls the conversation, manipulating Pentheus as if he were a puppet. Stung by a touch of Dionysian madness, the transvestite king hallucinates and sees everything double, at one moment even believing the stranger to be a bull. Their dialogue flows in couplets, largely focused on Pentheus' attire and appearance. The foolish king admires his costume and asks Dionysus if he walks and stands like his mother. Dionysus humors the vain and ridiculous monarch, adjusting a stray curl, tucking in a skirt, and correcting his posture as a director might an actor or a parent a child. Though he appears to serve Pentheus, Dionysus subtly hints that a special fate awaits him. The king, thrilled by his mission and impatient to catch the Maenads, grows increasingly vain, while the god's warnings quietly darken with violence. The scene culminates in a rapid, dramatic exchange of half-lines, during which Dionysus declares that Pentheus will be brought back to Thebes in a special state and at the hands of his own mother. Dionysus then hustles Pentheus away, declaring himself the victor in this contest. Bloodthirsty and vengeful, this fourth song of the chorus mirrors the third in structure but differs in tone and meter. The excited women summon the spirit of frenzy and urge it to the mountaintop, where Pentheus climbs. They imagine the mad Agaue standing on a cliff, spotting the lurking king, and calling to the other Maenads to attack him. The chorus's vision is not a literal foreshadowing of Pentheus' death, but a reworking of the cowherd's earlier account of the Maenads' assault on the cattle. The chorus sings of Pentheus' vicious impiety, emphasizing the danger of failing to honor the gods and maintain a balanced life. They summon Dionysus in his awesome and bestial forms, bull, snake, and lion, demanding the blood of Pentheus and the fulfillment of divine justice. In this final encounter between the two principal characters, the audience sees a completely transformed Pentheus. He has compromised his social authority, his sexuality, his identity, and even his mind. The king is now ready to be led into Dionysus's hilly realm, adorned with fawnskins, garlands, and long hair. Pentheus' transformation is not only external but internal, shown by his perception of a double sun. In Greek literary tradition, seeing a double sun symbolized insanity, and here Pentheus' vision signals the total disintegration of his mind. Ironically, it is in this mad state that he perceives the true form of the stranger, as a horned bull. This inversion of sanity and madness highlights both the power Dionysus wields over the human mind and the folly of trying to control the god with reason. The cross-dressing scene operates on multiple levels, both tragic and comic. In ritual terms, this encounter can be seen in two ways. First, it is an epiphany, a true appearance of the god in his bull-like form. The Bacchantes continually seek such appearances, and this is the second divine manifestation, the first being the off-stage voice in the previous scene. Second, it functions as a ritual dedication of Pentheus as a sacrifice to the god. He is ritually dressed, prepared, and led to slaughter, all for the glory of Dionysus. The scene follows the Bacchic ritual structure of procession to contest to celebration. Pentheus is not mystically transformed or reborn, as in authentic Bacchic rites, for this is a staged imitation. He is guilty not only of denying and insulting Dionysus, but also of being a sacrilegious impostor who seeks to spy on the god's devotees. By infringing upon Dionysian rituals, it is fitting that Pentheus die in a ritual fashion. On another level, the scene demonstrates to Pentheus, who claimed that Bacchic rites were a charade for drunkenness and sexual misbehavior, just how real and terrifying these rituals truly are. In theatrical terms, the encounter becomes self-referential. Euripides draws attention to the theatre's use of illusion, masks, and the tension between truth and falsehood. The scene also illustrates the more serious and dangerous aspects of theatre. Pentheus loses his identity as both man and king, becoming seduced by the role he plays. He is so absorbed in the part that he cannot see the death awaiting him, even when Dionysus explicitly warns him. Acting here transforms not just appearance but being itself. Finally, Dionysus, the god of theatre, plays a role while directing the entire charade, once again demonstrating mastery over truth, illusion, and human behavior. The scene suggests that actors, like Pentheus, are ultimately at the mercy of the theatre gods. In their last ode, The chorus had called for Pentheus' blood, and now their wish is fulfilled. The mourning messenger enters the palace courtyard and informs the chorus that Pentheus is dead. The chorus rejoices at the news, startling the messenger with their bloodthirstiness, urges him to give a detailed account of the events, and the messenger begins his tale. The three men had climbed the hill and found themselves in a valley overlooking a glen enclosed by cliffs. Within the glen, the women were seated under fir trees, mending their robes and garlands. Pentheus, unable to see the throng of women clearly, grows impatient and tells the stranger that he wants to climb the cliffs and perch in a tree to observe them in their supposed shamefulness. In response, the stranger astonishingly lowers a tall fir tree with his hands and places Pentheus on its tip, then gradually straightens the tree. Once the tree is upright, Pentheus is fully exposed to the Maenads, and the stranger disappears. A voice from the heavens declares Pentheus an enemy and commands the furious Bacchantes to destroy him. As before, the divine voice is accompanied by a fiery glow in the sky and followed by an eerie silence. Led by Agaue, her mouth frothing and eyes rolling, the Maenads reach the tree and attempt to stone the king with rocks and branches. Pentheus, too high on the tree, is out of reach. They try to uproot the tree but lack a strong enough lever. Finally, forming a circle around it, they shake and drag the tree down with their hands. Pentheus falls helplessly to the ground. In a last desperate effort, he cries to his mother to recognize him and forgive his mistakes. But the queen, maddened by the Bacchic rites, does not respond. Instead, she seizes her son's arm and pulls it from its socket. The other Maenads tear his body apart, scattering the pieces across the hillside. The frenzied mother then takes her son's decapitated head as a trophy and begins to march toward Thebes, praising Dionysus, whom she calls her fellow hunter. The messenger hastily concludes his story, eager to leave before the tragic woman returns. To sustain the urgency, the chorus launches into a brief song, first exultant over Pentheus' death, and then recognizing the horror of a mother tearing her son apart. Pentheus' death at the hands of Dionysus had been foreshadowed in the god's earlier address to the audience, yet the precise and horrific details were withheld until this climactic moment. In this final scene, the messenger vividly recounts Pentheus' gory and brutal sparagmos, or ritual dismemberment. Every particular detail of the king's death reinforces, echoes, or expands upon the earlier hints scattered throughout the play. This scene also serves as a summary of the main characters and their dynamics. When the three men reach the glen, Pentheus cannot see the Maenads, just as he has been unable to perceive Dionysus's powers or presence throughout the play. His own greed and folly, his desire to witness what is forbidden, entrap him. These details suggest that Pentheus is not merely a Dionysian scapegoat, but is responsible for his own fate. When Dionysus arches the tall fir tree and releases it slowly, he demonstrates both his supernatural powers and his self-control and patience. Once Pentheus falls to the ground, he reaches out to touch his mother's cheek, begging her not to kill him. Only in this final moment does he fully comprehend Dionysus's powers. The god's control over human minds surpasses even the deepest natural bond between mother and son. Pentheus' death takes on a slight note of tragedy only at the very end, when he acknowledges his errors, yet it is clear that the audience feels the deepest pathos for his mother, Agaue. The scene can also be understood as composed of multiple narrative and spatial circles that fold into one another. At the center are the Maenads, joyful in their own activities. Around them stand Dionysus, Pentheus, and the messenger. The chorus watches and encircles this arrangement, while the audience observes the chorus. When the Maenads discover Pentheus, he becomes part of the central circle. Similarly, once the chorus hears the messenger's account, it becomes an active participant in the main action of the play. Greek theatrical norms required that distant and violent actions occur off-stage. In the Bacchae, this convention amplifies the force and shock of the drama rather than diminishing it. A carefully crafted account delivered by a compelling voice proves more powerful than any attempt to enact the dismemberment of a human body on stage. No theatrical production could convincingly stage Pentheus' violent end. Such horror can exist only in the imaginations of the audience. Agaue, still possessed by the god, triumphantly enters the palace gates carrying the head of her son, believing it to be that of a lion. She speaks rapidly to the chorus, unable to contain her excitement at the result of her happy hunting. The chorus responds to her deluded words with a mixture of sorrow and gentle humor, humoring her madness. The queen is overjoyed at achieving great and manifest things, and wishes to share her triumph with her father and her son, Pentheus, calling for them to be summoned. She even asks that her son nail the head of her hunt to the palace wall. Cadmus enters, bringing with him the rest of Pentheus' remains. He is filled with grief for his daughter and laments the destruction of his lineage at the hands of Bromios. Agaue greets her father with happiness and continues to boast about her hunt. Gently, Cadmus guides his daughter back to the present moment and to the reality of what she holds through a series of questions. First, he asks her to look at the sky and see if it appears as it always does. Agaue replies that the sky seems brighter, as if it has a holy glow. Cadmus suggests that perhaps an inner excitement is coloring her perception. Slowly, Agaue begins to understand the difference and comes out of her trance. Cadmus then asks her whom she married and to whom she gave birth. When she names her husband and son, he asks her to tell him what she is holding. She first answers a lion, but then recognizes it for what it truly is: grief, deep grief, and misery for me. Yet she does not immediately recall that she holds the head of her son and must be reminded by her father, heightening the tragedy of the moment. A portion of the text is missing, but the scene resumes with Cadmus and Agaue lamenting their fate and reflecting on the reasons for Pentheus' death. Cadmus fondly remembers his grandson and remarks that Pentheus had to suffer for the sins of the entire family, for they had denied Dionysus at the time of his birth. The text again skips forward to Dionysus, now appearing on the palace roof in his divine form. The god proclaims the family's future. Agaue will be banished from Thebes, while Cadmus and his wife will be transformed into serpents and roam Greek lands alongside barbarian hordes. Ultimately, however, the god Ares will rescue them and send them to the land of the blessed. Cadmus and Agaue mourn their fates and exchange tearful final farewells. The chorus concludes the play with a brief 5-line chant, praising the power of the gods and their ability to achieve the improbable. These final verses, unremarkable in themselves, have been used by Euripides in 3 other plays. The Bacchae is a family tragedy, but it is most singularly Agaue's tragedy, which is especially striking given that the queen appears on stage in only one scene. Besides Pentheus, the Cadmus family, Cadmus and Agaue, appears only in the first and last scenes, while the central drama revolves almost entirely around Dionysus and Pentheus. By keeping the Cadmus family at the periphery, Euripides uses them as background, context, and frame. They amplify and filter the main events, but do not participate in those events as physical characters on stage. They also act as commentators and critics, essentially an audience within the drama, providing reflection on the core action, particularly in the final scene. Both Cadmus and Agaue accept responsibility for what has happened to Pentheus, yet they also question Dionysus's justice in different ways. Agaue's heart-wrenching grief and murderous guilt testify to the god's excessive, harsh, and cruel vengeance, while Cadmus reproaches Dionysus directly on 2 occasions, asserting that the retributive justice does not fit the offense. Dionysus, however, dismisses these laments with a fatalistic reminder that Zeus created a world ruled by harsh gods, while Euripides follows several classical conventions in the Bacchae, such as employing a complex chorus and using the messenger. He diverges sharply from Aristotle's ideal of drama. In classical Greek tragedy, as Aristotle defines it in the Poetics, the hero typically experiences a moment of recognition at the conclusion, moving from ignorance to knowledge, which coincides with catharsis, the release of emotions built up over the course of the play. In contrast, Pentheus does not genuinely repent or reflect philosophically on his mistakes. His only acknowledgement of error comes in a single line when he pleads with his mother not to kill him. The audience does not gain any metaphysical insight into Dionysus beyond the god's desire for deference, and the primary secret of the play, Dionysus's disguise, is known from the outset. Instead, Euripides emphasizes a long, shocking, and pathos-filled lament. This disproportionate focus highlights both Dionysus's absolute power and the excessive cruelty of his vengeance. The final scene, depicting a demented Agaue proudly holding the head of her son, is particularly effective because it is enacted on stage rather than reported by a messenger. Previously, all violent and disturbing actions, such as the slaughter of the cattle and the palace miracles, occurred off-stage and were recounted second-hand. By contrast, in this scene the audience witnesses the horror directly, while still emotionally fresh and unshocked. Euripides does not shy away from gruesome details, showing Agaue reconstructing the son she has torn apart. In this act, the audience understands that it is not only Pentheus' body that must be pieced together, but also the moral of the story and the future of Cadmus and Agaue. Tragically, some pieces of both the family and the lesson will always remain missing. The three great Greek tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, wrote a total of 92 plays, of which only 17 have survived. Most of these works were composed between the Greek victory over the Persians at Salamis and the Athenian defeat by Sparta. During this period, Athens underwent significant political, social, and economic transformations. In the early years, the tyrant Pisistratus and his sons controlled the city, but within a few years, constitutional changes led to the establishment of democracy. Abroad, the Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great, had already absorbed Asia Minor and exerted influence over the Ionian Greeks. The Athenians repelled the Persians and entered a period of expansion, combining internal democracy with imperial ambitions. This expansion of commerce and political influence brought wealth to Athens, stabilized the state, and provided the resources to adorn the Acropolis with public buildings of unparalleled style. Pericles, one of the most celebrated leaders of Athens, was regarded by many as the embodiment of the achievements of this era. Athens's growing power provoked jealousy in other Greek states, particularly Sparta and Corinth. In response, a Peloponnesian coalition led by Sparta launched a prolonged war against Athens, culminating in a costly Spartan victory. Although Euripides died 2 years before Athens fell, he witnessed both the city's rise and its decline during his lifetime. Euripides was born around 485 at Phyla in Attica, likely into a respectable family. He lived in Salamis, probably on his father's estate, and it is said that he composed his works in a seaside cave. He held a lay priesthood in the cult of Zeus and, according to evidence in his plays and other sources, was connected with leading philosophical thinkers of his day, including Protagoras and Socrates. Known as somewhat of a loner, he spent most of his life on his estate with his family. Late in life, around 408 or 407, he left Athens for Macedonia. The reasons for his departure are unclear. In Macedonia, he wrote his final play, The Bacchae, and was buried there. Euripides wrote primarily for Athens and its surrounding region, which gave his plays a concentrated geographical and historical focus. Like other dramatists of his era, he participated actively in the social and political life of his community. He is generally regarded as the most tragic and least decorous of the major tragedians, anticipating the individualism that would characterize the later Hellenistic age. The Bacchae was not performed during Euripides's lifetime. It reached the amphitheatre only after his death. Ironically, it won first prize at the festival where it was staged, a distinction that had eluded him throughout his life. The play is ranked alongside Aeschylus's Agamemnon and Sophocles' Oedipus the King. By Euripides's time, the story of Bacchus was well known and had been treated by other authors, including Aeschylus. Records of the cult of Dionysus in Euripides's era are sparse, though later periods are better documented. During his lifetime, Asian influences began to affect cult practices and beliefs. Dionysus himself evolved, assuming multiple roles: god of theatre, god of ecstatic female worshippers, god of fertility and wild nature, and god of vine and agriculture. He was often represented in phallic form. Alongside his ecstatic and virile aspects, Dionysus was also closely linked to Hades, the god of the underworld. Greek plays were always performed outdoors, with audiences seated on benches built into a circular hillside. The chorus and actors shared a round dancing floor, creating a spectacle of words, music, and movement. Most dramas took place in open spaces such as forecourts, courtyards, or streets, while private interiors were rarely depicted. Multiple actors played the roles, making masks essential for identifying characters. Since the actor's personality was separated from the role, dramatic emphasis relied heavily on the language itself. Productions were funded by both the state and private patrons, and playwrights typically directed their own works, retaining artistic control. The chorus consisted of dancers and singers. Unfortunately, the music and choreography of the time have been lost, so reconstructions depend solely on the texts. Dialogue and lyrics were sung by both actors and the chorus, using various meters that expressed different emotions, such as anger, grief, joy, or haste. Greek meter depended on the alternation of long and short syllables, rather than stressed and unstressed patterns as in English drama. Pentheus perceives Dionysus, appearing as the stranger, as dangerous despite the god's seemingly harmless qualities. The long-haired, ruddy-cheeked, laughing Dionysus shows no overtly threatening traits, yet Pentheus instantly dislikes him. To the ruler of Thebes, the protector of law and order, the luxurious stranger appears Eastern and barbarian, insidiously beautiful and suspiciously charming. In Pentheus' rigidly controlled society, even Dionysus's milder powers are intolerable, for they relax restraints and break barriers, directly opposing his sovereign discipline. Pentheus sees himself as safeguarding a civilized society, and cannot tolerate a force that he cannot imprison or control. As the chorus observes, Dionysus disrupts not only civic order but embodies that which cannot be conquered. Pentheus' fundamental antagonism toward Dionysus and what he represents drives him to label the Bacchic revelers as profligate and lawless. Beyond the threat to his kingdom, Dionysus appears personally dangerous to Pentheus. Through their interactions, Pentheus realizes that Dionysus has the upper hand, that the reasoning of irrationality surpasses his own. He begins to question his beliefs, loses his willpower, and ultimately falls into Dionysus's grasp, compelled to witness the very licentiousness he had condemned. In the play, Dionysus might appear to champion women, but the reality is more complex. While historically the cults of Dionysus included male participants, both the chorus and the mountaintop maenads are exclusively women. Interestingly, none of Dionysus's powers are specifically designed to benefit women. The prominence of female devotees reflects cultural perceptions of women as vulnerable and prone to frenzy, forming a natural backdrop to the god's power. Women's supposed submissiveness also aligns with their participation in collective cult practices. Pentheus' descent into madness parallels these traits. He dresses as a woman, fusses over his clothes, and affects feminine speech. Far from acting as a champion for women, Dionysus subjects them to the same dangers as men. Although Pentheus' death may be justified, the tragedy that befalls his mother Agaue is arguably more profound, for she is innocent yet must bear the consequences. Euripides does not clearly side with either Dionysus or Pentheus, and he refrains from articulating a simple moral position. While the play sharply contrasts the established stances of god and king, the playwright's own judgment remains ambiguous. By portraying Dionysus as both divine and mortal, Euripides simultaneously divides his appraisal of the god. On one hand, Dionysus appears calm, attractive, and personally persuasive. On the other, his divine form, speaking from off-stage, is intractable, curt, and ruthless. This duality raises the question of whether the darker, divine aspect is inseparable from the lighter, festive side. Pentheus fears the dangerous potential of Dionysian disorder, enough to justify banning even innocent pleasures like wine and song. Euripides does not provide a definitive answer, but hints at the need for wisdom to balance Dionysian chaos while still enjoying communal festivities, as promised by the stranger and rejected by Pentheus. Ultimately, Dionysus's moral ambiguity reflects the absurdity inherent in faith in the gods. When Cadmus urges Dionysus not to act with human-like vengeance, the god replies that Zeus, his father, long ago sanctioned such actions. Like the often perplexing and unsettling nature of religious texts, accepting Dionysus requires ultimate faith in divine knowledge and the orders established by the gods.